Thanks for joining me today. My name is Emily Friedman. I'm the University of Washington Alacrity Center's User Research and Design Lead. I first studied human factors and ergonomics at Cornell University and went on to get my master's in industrial design. I then started my career at design consultancies where I did upfront design research and user testing for both consumer goods and medical devices. Prior to moving to Seattle, I worked at the Mayo Clinic's Center for Innovation, where I was the lead service designer for their healthy aging and independent living laboratory. So today we're here to talk about facilitating user research remotely. I like this definition of design research that Frog Design, a design consultancy, uses. Many of you may be experienced in clinical research. Design research informs and inspires the design process. We are not only observing challenges and how they can be improved, a main goal is to understand underlying motivations behind people's behavior. If you're new to user research, you may be concerned that by doing it at a distance, you can't quite get the empathy or the authenticity or really the kind of data you need. But there are definitely some benefits to it. Depending on the activity you design, you can have access to a participant when they're in the moment that you are interested in, just like in traditional field research. I'll be talking later about diary studies and how you can have people use their cell phones to capture authentic experiences, thoughts, and feelings. Increased inclusiveness. People right now have more time or bandwidth to participate in research if their work is on hold. And with people confined, feeling bored or restless but still in good health, they may welcome this opportunity. Location and space are no longer limitations with remote sessions. For user research, this means access to a more diverse group of participants who you might not have access to locally. Attendee convenience. Participants might be more willing and able to attend remote sessions that don't actually require them to leave their office or home. They'll save the commute time and they can participate from the comfort of their own space. Especially with remote, unmoderated research or remote, asynchronous ideation, participants can complete tasks on their own schedule. And the speed in which you can conduct research is also faster as well. The researchers don't have to travel to multiple sites for observations, and inherent in a lot of the available tools are a way to transcribe or share video clips with other stakeholders and begin to synthesize much faster. There are, however, drawbacks to be aware of. It's simply easier to catch and read participant body language and recognize which breaks in dialogue are appropriate times to probe or ask follow-up questions when you're in a shared space. There is less energy in the room. You just don't get the same enthusiasm with people leaving the room bouncing off of each other. Everyone will have more distractions. They may have many windows open at once with email and Facebook notifications coming in. Particularly right now when we're all at home, participants may have kids, family members, or animals in the same space. There's that kind of distraction as well. Also, people don't tend to speak up. You really do have to facilitate the conversation. When you are sitting in the same room, you feel a certain vibe, and when there's an uncomfortable silence, people tend to fill the void. On video conferences, this doesn't happen as much. Either you lose everyone, or one person speaks up and you have one loud voice leaving the conversation. So that does happen. And your role is to make the rounds, drawing people out and giving everyone a chance to talk. In Zoom, I prefer to keep the views in gallery mode. There's a button at the top right of your screen that toggles between gallery mode and speaker view. Gallery mode lets you see all the participants at once in a grid. If there is someone who you know is shy or for whatever reason hesitant to speak up, I like to call on them first so that they can get it out of the way and they don't feel like they have to go along with the popular view in the group. Knowing your attendees really helps. We're all facing unprecedented changes to how we live and work. There may be last-minute changes, higher dropout rates, and sessions that need to be cut short. That's okay. Be sensitive and know when to shift gears or questions. Things will be different and difficult for you, your participants, and your team. We're all human. Things are just different and difficult right now. Running an online session requires a lot more preparation than in person. Planning and practice and doing a run through to make sure the software is working is key. Set expectations with your team about what your goals are and what the agenda is. Set the participants' expectations on their time commitment, how to log on, anything else they should do as homework or bring to have with them. Set the ground rules. Everyone should show their face and no multitasking. Establish rapport and encourage your participants to over communicate as well. Prepare clear instructions for your participants about whatever exercises you are doing or software you are using. Treat the instructions you are sending as a product in itself. If you find that some of the first participants have trouble with a particular detail, then iterate and improve the instructions for next time. Choose wisely how many people are in the session. This goes for participants as well as your team members. It can be awkward to have many people observing, even if their video is shut off. There should be a note taker, but perhaps other team members can just review the video. As for participants, the larger the group, the harder it is for everyone to share and feel heard. I'll give you a couple ideas about ways to address this in a moment. Share note-taking responsibilities. It's hard to take notes and be an active listener as the facilitator. The best thing to do is have a second note taker. If I'm taking notes while facilitating, I will tend to just jot down a keyword and the time. This is typically what happens when there's a good quote I know that I'm going to want to review the video in order to pull out. So, practice. Particularly if you are working with a new tool so that you don't have to spend your session trying to figure out a feature. But beware. Even if you prepare and practice, remote sessions can often have unforeseen technical glitches. Just be understanding and patient. Running a group, your role as a facilitator is not to give a presentation, but rather to facilitate tasks, conversations, and activities that involve everyone. Make sure no one activity is longer than 20 minutes. There's actually some neuroscience behind this 20-minute rule. It's important to mention that in Washington state, you need to be sure to get specific consent for recording somebody, even if they have already consented to participating in the study. Best practice would be to ask about being recorded before you turn on the recording, and then confirm it again after the recording is turned on. Then you have consent documented in your recordings. And finally, remember to press record. Trust me, it is very easy to forget, and you will definitely regret it. Make it the note taker's job to remind you. Instead of doing an all-day workshop remotely, break them into different sessions with long breaks. Zoom is great because you can do breakout rooms and divide your attendees into smaller groups. Or maybe run the same session more than once and later bring everyone together for synthesis. Another way to work with large groups is to set up activities to be done independently, using programs like Miro or Fun Retro, both of which I will be demoing, and then coming back together as a larger group to talk about what everyone has done. That's just something to remember about working online, that you can ask people to go offline or do one-on-one or small group activities, and then everyone comes back together. Similar to how you might run an all-day workshop where you change the activities and format up every 20 minutes. It's very hard with more than 6 people to make sure everyone gets heard when you are soliciting opinions. Think about what you are trying to achieve. You can be strategic in that if you know that there are 2 stakeholders who are going to have differing opinions and maybe butt heads, get them in the same session so they can work out their issues and their differences and bring everyone back together and say that this is what they've been through. It's much more democratic and avoids the authority bias and groupthink that can come with face-to-face meetings. Finally, take a minute to consider your setup. Think about what is behind you and pick a nice view, or at least a plain one. You may even want to set your laptop on top of some books to raise it to a more flattering angle. When facilitating, you should be focusing your eyes on the camera and working to connect with your audience. A trick Daniel Stillman, who runs the Conversation Factory, taught me is to draw a smiley face on the back of a sticky note, pop it above your camera to draw your attention there. Additionally, if you're working from a laptop with limited screen real estate, a little clamp called a Mountie that can connect to an iPad is an option to give you more room to look at multiple windows at once. All the things that I'm mentioning today during this webinar are going to be at the end of the presentation. All the links will be there for you to reference. So just about any form of research can be performed remotely. The first method you probably think of is surveys. Surveys are a great tool for remote research. They give you a high N, only usually limited by budget, and they can quantify the attitudinal thoughts your users have about your subject area. We'll be leading a webinar at a later date focused on remote survey research. But today I'm going to talk about some remote qualitative methods. Foundational exploratory research is where you are exploring the problem space, understanding the context, and what matters to your stakeholders. It is definitely more challenging establishing rapport with a participant remotely because eye contact and body language are not as easy to use to connect. It's important to convey the core tenet of user research, that their input is critical to the successful design of whatever it is you're designing. I make it clear whether I am talking to the head of a medical department, a patient, or a custodian that they are the expert. There are no right answers, and their experience is what matters. I ask smart but not leading questions. I say a lot of, tell me more about that. I assure them that I am not invested in one thing or another. My feelings are not at stake, and they should be comfortable talking to me honestly. Instead of conducting focus groups face-to-face, there are platforms such as Slack that are available to facilitate an online group discussion that can be moderated in real time when you see people answering your questions, and you can ask them to elaborate or explain something. You can also run these asynchronously, where the discussion can be held over a number of days to allow people flexibility about when they can participate and add to their responses. This is a great method for prolonged engagement. One of our Alacrity-funded projects is focused on these asynchronous remote communities, and you can find a video on our resource page of our website where I interview the two investigators about this method and when it can be most useful. Discussion groups and interviews will only help you understand what people say. They're not great at helping you understand what people do. And what people do and what people say can be completely different things. This is why observation is so important. When you can't go observe, you need to get creative. Digital diaries, which can also be called photo elicitation, video elicitation, voice elicitation. It's a method that involves asking research participants to use a camera or voice recording app, often just on their smartphone, to take photos or make videos or voice memos, or just write about their everyday practices and interactions that they then share with the researchers. Maybe you were going to do a home or office visit and can't anymore. Ask them to videotape a museum tour of their space. You as the researchers can provide questions, prompts, or simply triggers or cues that the participant should look for to tell them to take out their tool and to capture the nuances. For example, the people they're with, where they are, what they're doing, how they're feeling. It's your job to coach participants on what to document and when. It can be action-based or emotion-based. For example, whenever you were doing X or whenever you were feeling Y. Concentrating on the highs and lows can really save time in the analysis. Diaries can be used over months or hours, depending on the focus of the study. They can be used at interval-based sampling, where you record something every hour or at every evening, or event-based, where it's more irregular. You can ask open-ended questions to collect rich, thick data. For example, tell us about a moment this week when you struggled with a client. These put the choices in the hands of the participant. Researchers have assumptions about what's important to them, but a good trigger with boundaries can show us things we weren't expecting. You can also ask smart, closed-ended questions. For example, providing a scale from frustrating to very satisfying and asking, at this moment, Using this electronic health record, how are you feeling? Other triggers might be show us moments when you're overwhelmed, or show us what happens when you do blank. Insert any activity here. Another way to use this method is to ask them to video themselves or record their screen doing everyday routine tasks that you may have originally planned on observing during a shadowing session. Asking a series of questions every day for weeks adds rigor to qualitative data because you have more comparisons. Your N in the study could be small, but by multiplying the amount of diary entries, you can scale up and add reliability to the results. Assigning a diary as homework prior to an interview can also help you to understand context and set the tone. Mapping is another helpful tool for the discover phase to develop empathy and uncover user needs and weaknesses in the processes and implementations. Here are 4 types that each depict different processes and have different goals. Nielsen Norman Group has a good article going over these 4 common methods, their defining characteristics, and when to use which. We'll share the link to that in the chat. I'm going to show an example now of how one of our Alacrity teams have used the online collaboration tool Miro to do a journey map of a cancer treatment. So this is Miro. It is a collaborative whiteboard online that comes with a lot of really usable templates, as you can see here. You can also create a blank board. And so, as I mentioned, this team used it to do a journey map of cancer care treatment. And I'm just going to give you a taste of what this looks like because Gina Sue, who worked on this project, and I did a whole video. It's not that long, but it's much more in depth about the possibilities of how you can use Miro in your project. So this is really just to give you a taste. As you can see, it can be used internally, like this team did, to work together to map out, in this situation, a journey of a patient in Seattle Care Cancer Alliance and their treatment. You have all sorts of tools over here where you can add comments, you can draw shapes such as these red shapes, arrows, you can put post-it notes. Another way that we've used it internally here, this is another internal tool or way that we used it to plan an all-day workshop with the team. And so we were able to import, for example, PowerPoint slides and make comments and use sticky notes. It can also be used in terms of a co-design session with your participants as well. One last thing I just want to mention, and here's another board, is that you also have the ability to import data. So for example, all these sticky notes that you see here were downloaded from an Excel spreadsheet, and then they used this online space as a collaborative area to do affinity diagram. A quick note about the online tools that are available for research. Many of them are not HIPAA compliant, in part because the process of that certification is prohibitively expensive for small companies. While everyone's IRB is different, I asked our IRB administrator for tips about submitting a request to use one. Her advice was just to make the case that this research is no greater than minimal risk, and that even if you are working with patients, you are not collecting personal data. They're really just acting as advisors on your project. One simple tool that I want to show you is Fun Retro. Fun Retro is a tool that effectively lets you set up question and answer boards. You get 3 free boards every month, and there are a lot of templates for standard retros where you ask what went well, what to improve, and action items. However, you can also customize it for your needs. As you can see, you can just type here and you can type any question you want. You can use this to collect insights, people's thoughts on things, generate content for a brainstorming session. In this example, it was a discussion group with older adults, and what I was able to do was ask questions and have them answer it one by one. And you can use the settings here to hide the cards, which means that as people are answering the questions, other answers are blocked out or blurred out, sorry, so that people aren't influenced by each other. What's great is that as you collect your insights, you can then take it to the next level where perhaps you realize that um, I rely on the computer for email and staying connected is very similar to email, Facebook with technology. It's so easy. So you have the ability to start merging things, and you can get a really clear view of where the consensus is. This is great for requirements building or user research. You can also add in comments, and you can ask people to vote so you can prioritize as a group which items to focus on. How many votes you want to allocate to anybody. And one of the best things about using Fun Retro is that it's really easy to share. You do not need to register, which makes it distinctive from other tools you may use online. You just click share, it copies your URL, and you can insert it into any email you want to send. Card sorting is a method that was created to help design or evaluate the information architecture of a website. But there are other applications for it, since it allows you to have a better understanding of how users perceive or group topics, which help you to categorize or prioritize your content. In a card sorting session, participants organize topics into categories that make sense to them, and they may also help you label these groups. After the participants sort the cards, the moderator should ask them to explain their logic to understand the reasoning. I like to use the program Trello for card sorting. So for this example, we're looking at a modular CBT program developed for late life anxiety called Peaceful Living, developed by Mindy Stanley. In this situation, what I've done is I have made a card for each of the components within the therapy. You can add as much detail as you like. You can add a description if you want to go into what behavioral activation is. In this situation, what I've done is I have labeled the components that are considered optional in orange and the components that are considered critical in green. And I could ask a participant while I'm sharing the screen with them for them to drag the components and build a therapy that meets the needs of whatever it is we are discussing. So they can move it around if they like it. I've seen card sorting used successfully in a project at the Alacrity Center where they are studying a treatment for depression for postnatal mothers. And in that situation, the therapy can be delivered in part before the baby is born and in part after the born. And so card sorting was used as an exercise to break things into groups as, pre-birth, post-delivery, to figure out what makes the most sense. In this situation, they were able to do it as a group. They organized their thoughts and then each sort of hashed it out and discussed and came up with a general consensus for the plan. I've also seen card sorting used as a way to just get people's reaction to a certain experience or product. In that situation, they were given a list, multiple cards with adjectives written on them, equally split between positive and negative, and asked to go through all the different cards and pull the cards that were most appropriate to describe their experience. So there's a lot of way to get creative with this. Trello, although it is designed originally, it was designed to be a task sharing app. Other people have gotten creative with it as well, and there are lots of templates for you to use. So, for example, you can see here, this is a template available on Trello for how to do a heuristic evaluation. So, depending on your needs, you just have to be creative about how to use it. Evaluative research is when you are taking concepts or prototypes back to the stakeholder for feedback and to make sure they are well designed, useful, and usable. I could give a whole presentation on usability testing, so I'm just going to do a quick overview today. You can conduct usability tests on an app or a tool or even a worksheet that you've created. Before spending money on developers for a digital product, it's recommended that you do testing on a low fidelity mockup using, for example, InVision to create it. Before you pick a particular usability testing method, you should have a clear understanding of your target audience, available resources, time and money, and research objectives. This information not only will help you select the relevant testing method, but also adjust the questions and tasks for your test participants. Unmoderated remote research testing offers robust, quick, and inexpensive user testing results to be used for further analysis. It can help you test a particular question or observe users' behavior patterns in a natural setting. The downside is that it creates less detailed results. When you use a moderator for remote user testing, they can ensure that the participant understands the directions, analyze facial expressions, and ask follow-up questions after the test. Remote usability testing doesn't go deep into a test participant's reasoning. That's why it's not recommended to use unmoderated remote testing as a first usability testing method. There are lots of tools that are available to help you with this, such as Dscout or Lookback. I've tried to incorporate a lot of the questions we got during the live session into this webinar. If we haven't reached, if you have a particular question that I did not get to and that our resources don't help you with, feel free to reach out to me at my email address right here. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this. Have a good day.